In the Ottoman Middle East before World War I, and by that I mean the period stretching roughly from Algeria in the west to Iraq in the east, and including very significantly what's now Turkey as well, Muslims, Christians, and Jews got along okay. In other words, things were neither abysmal nor great. People persisted in their everyday lives in proximity. I should emphasize that in the book, conflict is not the primary theme. Most people in most times got along pretty well. What was the case, or what was certainly true, is that the Ottoman state, like many earlier Islamic states across history, had categorized people by religion. It defined people as either Muslims or non-Muslims and included Christians and Jews, and prescribed to Christians and Jews before the 19th century a subordinate social status. So Christians and Jews had freedom to pursue their livelihoods and practice their religions as long as they recognized Muslim authority. And this situation created some latent tensions, but for the most part, people got along. It was only in periods of crisis, such as periods of war, or when taxes were high, harvests were bad, when there were floods, that many social tensions would come to the fore. My two favorite examples of the places where people came together and where you can see a certain kind of conviviality, if you will, are in the realms of music and food. Musicians seem to be the most gregarious people. They would often consort across religious lines. And in the 19th century, there are even cases where Muslim musicians would go to listen to their Jewish friends singing in devotional songs in the synagogue or in the churches. So musicians especially mixed a lot. Another area where people mixed was in the realm of food, especially what we'd now call foodies, or people who loved gastronomy, would follow with interest the culinary cultures of other groups. And for that reason, we have a significant cookbook tradition in the Middle East, especially paying attention to holiday foods of the different religious communities. But I would add to that, one area where people did not come together, where you don't see so much social convergence, which fascinated me, is in the realm of clothing. Because it's when you look at what people were wearing on their head or as robes or in their footwear that you can see some of the social tensions and hierarchies that were really present. You would have been able before the 19th century to look at somebody, to look at a man, say, walking by on the street, and just by glancing at what he was wearing, you would be able to tell if he was Muslim, Christian, or Jewish, and maybe even determine some things about his social standing and his profession and his social rank as a whole. The 19th century was a period of rapid change, and many factors converged to disrupt harmony in Ottoman lands at this time. For a start, there was nationalist sentiment growing, especially among Christian communities, some of whom chafed under the traditional social hierarchies that the arrangement with dhimmis had produced. So you see, for example, in the 1820s, the Greek War for Independence. There was also increasing pressure from abroad as Western powers started to press in and chip away at Ottoman territories. A vivid example of that is the French conquest of Algeria in 1830. And as the Ottoman Empire and the leaders of the Ottoman Empire started to become more concerned over perceptions of their weakness, losing land and also kind of losing economic clout, they began to enact a series of reforms in the 19th century called the Tanzimat reforms, in an effort to try to make Muslims, Christians, and Jews in the empire feel a closer sense of attachment to it, to create, some would say, even a kind of Ottoman citizenship. And so one of the reforms that the Ottoman Sultan issued was one that ostensibly promoted religious parity, that ostensibly dismantled religious hierarchies by eliminating the distinction between Muslims and non-Muslims or Muslims and dhimmis. The problem was that not everybody was ready to go along with these changes, and it's also not clear about the extent to which the authorities bought into the whole package of reforms themselves. So, for example, Christians and Jews may have welcomed the idea of being more equal in some sense, but they didn't want to be drafted into the military. And Muslims, for their part, may not have wanted Christians and Jews, who had historically not been allowed to serve in Ottoman states, to come into the military with them. So people were not necessarily coming together in the ways you would think. And there were also growing disparities in wealth and power, and these proved decisive in eroding harmony in the 19th century. Notably, as Christian and Jewish populations started to gain more access to education through mission schools, especially both Christian and Jewish mission schools, and through access to health care. And as Christians and Jews started to engage more in trade with Western Europe, there began to be perceptions of a difference in wealth that challenged the social hierarchies that had been built on the assumption of Muslims relative to Christians and Jews. And all of these factors converged to create tensions in the social landscape in the years before World War I. I can think of at least 4 things. 3 of them are smaller, 1 is big. So the 3 smaller takeaways are these. I hope that readers will come away with a better understanding of the roles that religion did and did not play in Middle Eastern societies. How religion intersected with the range of other variables, including gender, place of origin, the language that one spoke, one's profession, in shaping social identities and social behaviors. I also hope that readers will come away with a deeper appreciation for the cultural richness of the Ottoman Middle East, its staggering cultural diversity. And then too, I hope readers will come to appreciate the history of everyday life. I've tried to put details in about, again, things like what people were wearing and eating and what people were doing for fun, in order to, in a way, humanize what is otherwise an extremely serious, potentially serious subject, the subject of intercommunal relations in the Middle East. But the biggest takeaway is this one. I hope that by studying sympathetically the challenges that the late Ottoman Empire faced in trying to manage cultural and religious diversity in its midst, we today as readers can see what worked and what didn't work, and therefore what lessons we should draw as we try to create a harmonious, equitable, and pluralistic culture in our own midst.